Welcome to the Yokes Podcast, a space for young adults, especially women who are hungry for truth and ready to go deeper in their faith. I'm Abby Clark, and each week we'll dive into the hard questions and weighty topics that many ministries avoid. This isn't surface level, this is about growing in biblical truth together. So let's get yoked to Christ and to one another as we learn, wrestle, and walk in faith. Okay, hi everybody. Oh, I'm so excited for today's episode. It's going to be a good one. The vibes today are so good. Like, it's kind of cloudy, kind of rainy, it's chilly, and it's just like cozy in here. And I'm just excited to talk about this, so it's going to be good. I'm just very happy it's fall. Like, the past week has just been the best. I don't know where you guys all live and if it's fall weather or if it's like already winter weather. I'm from Canada, so like it's already freezing there. It's not even fall. So being in Tennessee is great because you actually get the seasons, and I just love it. Okay, enough of that. Enough of the fall talk. Let's just get into it. I wanted to talk about this last week because it was very relevant, but I thought that would have been kind of a big jump for the first episode. So we're doing it this week, but we're talking about IVF, and is it biblical? So the reason we're talking about this is because October 16th, President Trump came to an agreement with one of the leading pharmaceutical companies to make IVF more affordable and accessible. So, all right, all this information is from directly from the White House website, so you can go look for yourself. I kind of read through it, and they use kind of confusing terms, so it's paraphrased a little bit, but you can go right to their website and get all the numbers and all the things if you want that. But this is from the White House website, paraphrased. So, a new deal with drug maker EMD Sereno will lower the cost of fertility drugs like GONLAF to match the lowest prices in other developed countries, saving women up to $2,200 per IVF cycle. Low and middle income women will get even bigger discounts when buying through TrumpRx.gov. And the company will also start manufacturing IVF drugs in the U.S. and offer Medicaid and American patients the same low prices. The FDA will fast-track approval of lower-cost fertility drugs already used in Europe, which could bring even more competition and lower prices. In addition, the government is creating a new option for employers to offer standalone fertility benefits similar to dental or vision plans, so more workers can get coverage for IVF and related treatments. These changes aim to reduce the cost of fertility care, expand coverage, and help more American families afford to have children at a time when birth rates are at record lows. Okay. President Trump says, "We want more babies," to put it very nicely, and for the same reason, we will also allow new parents to deduct major newborn expenses from their taxes. So that parents that will have a beautiful baby will be able to. So we're pro-family, but the IVF treatments are expensive. It's very hard for many people to do it and get it, but I've been in favor of IVF right from the beginning. Okay. This past election, I think is very clear that one side leaned more pro-life than the other. The Democratic Party is very, very anti-life. I won't even say pro-choice. Like, it's just anti-life. Like, that, literally the complete opposite of pro-life. And I don't think President Trump is anywhere close to being pro-life, but his policies were a lot better than the Democratic Party's. And again, it's having to choose between the lesser of the evils. And again, I think President Trump has done some really great things for the pro-life movement, but he could be more pro-life. I think that'd be great. And that's good though, because we don't want to agree with everything that our president does or says, because we never will, because I don't think we'll ever have a president that fully aligns with our biblical beliefs, but it is important to lean to the side that aligns with what we believe the most. But, that being said, on paper, this seems like a really good thing. More babies, lower cost of having babies, like that seems like an amazing thing on paper. And while yes, more babies is a great thing, this is not how it should be done. IVF is not the way to do it. We've lost 26 million Gen Z babies due to abortion, and on top of that, the babies we've lost due to IVF, which we will get into. And so more life is always what we want, but this is not the answer for it. Before we get into it, all that being said, the reason I am pro-life, and the reason I'm sure a lot of you are and a lot of other people are is because all life matters, right? Being pro-life means protecting the life of the unborn babies who can't advocate for themselves. Not just in the case of abortion, because unborn babies are not for sale. They aren't potential life. They already have it. They aren't to be put under contracts. Like in the case of IVF, they should not be robbed of having their blood-related parents to be given to a couple that is living an unbiblical lifestyle, and they aren't meant to live in a fridge in a lab for 20 plus years. All unborn children are deserving of living the life that God intended in his perfect created order. No matter how you are conceived, whether it was in a lab through IVF, through rape, through an unwed couple, your life matters and you have value because everyone is made in the image of God. Psalm 139 says that we are made in the image of God, right? God does not make mistakes. So no matter how you were conceived, even if you were conceived through a way that is not biblical and doesn't align with God's created order, you still matter and you still have value because God made you in his image. And that is just a beautiful thing. Okay, that was just my quick preface, because when we talk about subjects like these, it's never to attack, the mother or the father involved. It's always about the unborn life, right? We advocate for this because we are fighting for the rights of the people who can't fight for their rights, right? The most vulnerable people group is these unborn babies. So that's always important to remember. When we talk about this stuff, it always goes back to the life of the unborn baby. All right, so let's get into it. What is IVF? So this is from the Mayo Clinic. I believe they are the biggest hospital in the world, biggest or leading hospital. They have the most advanced technology, all the things. So this is a very secular source, right? This is straight off of their website. So this is just all pure facts being laid out, right? I'm not trying to dig and find these secret things. No, this is very public information that everyone can find. All right, so the Mayo Clinic says IVF, which stands for in vitro fertilization, is a fertility treatment where eggs are retrieved from the ovaries, fertilized with sperm in a lab, and the resulting embryos are transferred into the uterus. In vitro fertilization, also called IVF, is a complex series of procedures that can lead to pregnancy. It's a treatment for infertility, a condition in which you can't get pregnant after at least a year of trying for most couples. IVF also can be used to prevent passing on genetic problems to a child. That's eugenics. We're going to get into that later, though. During IVF, mature eggs are collected from ovaries and fertilized by sperm in a lab. Then a procedure is done to place one or more of the fertilized eggs, called embryos, in a uterus, which is where babies develop. One full cycle of IVF takes about 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes these steps are split into different parts, and the process can take longer. IVF is the most effective type of fertility treatment that involves the handling of eggs or embryos and sperm. Together, the group of treatment is called assisted reproductive technology. IVF can be done using a couple's own eggs and sperm, or it may involve eggs or sperm or embryos from a known or unknown donor. In some cases, gestational carrier, someone who has an embryo implanted in the uterus, might be used. So, surrogacy. Okay. So this is a quick little step-by-step of kind of the process of IVF and how it works, just so you kind of have this picture of what it is. So a single IVF cycle can take 4 to 6 weeks from start to embryo transfer. All right, so for the person providing the eggs, they need to do blood tests, ultrasounds, uterine evaluation, and infectious disease screening. Common medications, GONLAF, which is we talked about earlier that President Trump wants to make more affordable. So they kind of stimulate the follicles. And then there's monitoring. So you'll have ultrasounds and blood tests every few days to make sure that your hormone levels are where they're supposed to be at. And then when your follicles reach maturity, your doctor usually schedules the trigger shot. So you take the injection to mature the eggs fully and prepare them for retrieval. Guys, someone's calling me. Sorry for that pause. My best friend was calling me. So if you're watching this, that is why I did not pick up your call. Okay, let's resume. So, all right. So you take this trigger shot, which fully matures the eggs and makes them ready for retrieval. And so then once that happens, which the retrieval usually happens about 34 to 36 hours after this trigger shot is given, you go under light anesthesia, and doctor uses a thin needle to collect the eggs from your ovaries through the vaginal wall. And this is a pretty quick procedure. It says it usually takes 15 to 30 minutes, and then they usually get about 8 to 15 eggs. And then that's when the actual IVF process happens. The eggs and sperm are mixed in a petri dish. All right, that is basically the process, just so you, I don't know, kind of know what that looks like. Takes a while, lots of drugs you need to put into your body, and all the things. So, why do people use IVF? So this is also straight from the Mayo Clinic website. They say treating infertility, donor for eggs, sperms, and embryos, gestational surrogacy, genetic testing, again, eugenics. Yeah, we'll get into that. We will get into that. Fertility preservation, that's when they freeze the eggs. Recurrent loss solutions, LGBTQ plus family building, and research. Okay, so that's all from their website. So the problem. IVF, on paper, I think can seem like a really good thing because it leads to, someone struggling with infertility having children, which is great, right? We want children, but this is not the way to do it. Dr. Richard DeClue said, for the woman to have the chance of carrying a single child, many more are created that will either die after being thrown out or directly killed after implantation. Okay, so IVF is carried out 2.5 million times annually around the world, but each year only 500,000 babies are actually born from the IVF procedure. According to research published in the Reproductive Biomedicine Online, that means that each year, if just one embryo is created during each IVF cycle, and the average is 7, at least 80%, so that's at least 2 million of the human beings created through IVF either die during the process, are frozen indefinitely, or are destroyed. According to the World Health Organization, there are 37 million induced abortions each year around the world, and 29% of all pregnancies end in induced abortion. That means that when we are comparing rates, humans are being destroyed by IVF at a higher rate than they are abortion. All right, this is also from the Mayo Clinic. If more than one embryo is placed in your uterus, IVF can cause you to have multiple pregnancy. A surgery called fetal reduction, which would be aborting one of those babies out of the womb, can be used to help a person deliver fewer babies. In other words, in order for the woman to have the chance of carrying a single child, many more are created that will either die or be thrown out. This is evil, right? Killing these babies. This is an act of evil. Even and people are unaware. I think that's the thing. People don't know this. People aren't educated on this, and so they would never know that IVF is killing millions and millions of unborn babies every single year. Okay, and then another problem, it puts to practice eugenics. So eugenics is the belief or practice of trying to improve the genetic quality of the human population, usually by encouraging people with desirable traits to reproduce and discouraging or preventing those with undesirable traits from doing so. So it's literally what Hitler did. It's what the Holocaust was, right? And this is going to sound pretty dramatic, but I think that puts into perspective the genocide that's happening literally under our noses, okay? So over the span of the 12-year war, roughly, this is World War II, roughly 11 million people were killed. That's over 12 years. Roughly 73 million abortions happen worldwide every year. That's from the World Health Organization. Abortion and IVF is causing the largest genocide of the most vulnerable people group. I'm not saying this to downplay what happened during World War II, to discredit how tragic and devastating that was, but we literally have a genocide happening under our noses. That's just insane. 73 million abortions every year, right? And that's not even including the IVF numbers. Okay, So eugenics, all right? Embryos are allowed to develop in the incubator until they reach a stage where a small sample can be removed. The sample is tested for certain genetic diseases or the correct number of thread-like structures of DNA called chromosomes. Embryos that don't contain affected genes or chromosomes can be transferred to the uterus. So basically what they're saying here, if the embryo doesn't contain those genes or chromosomes that, like for example, like Down syndrome, then they will transfer them to the uterus, but if not, they'll just be destroyed. So yeah, it is devaluing the life of these unborn babies. Just because, Down syndrome is just the first one that comes to my head. There could be a number of other things. Just because they have a genetic disease, genetic mutation that, may cause them to have Down syndrome or any number of things, does not devalue their life, and that does not give us the right to decide if they get to be born or not, right? And we see that with abortions as well, right? They could see if a child is going to have Down syndrome, and they'll give you the option to abort the baby. That is evil. That is so evil, because God is the only one who gets to give and take life. We do not have the authority to do that. Hebrews 12 says that God is the author and the finisher. He is the ultimate authority. We are not. It's so sad. Guys, this just breaks my heart. Okay. And then the risks for IVF. So there's stress. It can be draining for the mind, body, and finances. There can be complications from the procedure. Ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. This can just be where the ovaries become swollen and painful just from how many of the fertility shots and medicines you have to take. Miscarriage. The rate of miscarriage for people who conceive with IVF is about, who conceive with IVF. So it's about 15% for people pregnant in their 20s, and then it's over 50% for those in their 40s. And the rate rises usually with the person's age. Ectopic pregnancy, which is when one of the eggs attaches to tissue outside the uterus. And then this is also from the Mayo Clinic. Multiple pregnancy, so you could have more than one baby, and that's when they will use that selective abortion to get rid of the other babies. Birth defects, premature delivery and low birth weight, and cancer. It can higher the rate of cancer from all the hormones and medicines that you have to take. Okay, so there's a lot of problems with IVF there, and again, like I said earlier, it always comes back to the life of the unborn child, right? We're not discussing this because we want to be more righteous than other people and be like, oh, this is this big moral problem and I'm more righteous than you because I think it's wrong. No, it's because we need to advocate, again, for the most vulnerable people group is the unborn children, and especially in the case of IVF, these little lives that aren't even in the womb, they're just in this little petri dish in a lab. That is not where life belongs, right? That is not God's design. So, getting into that, why is it unbiblical? IVF dehumanizes the life of embryos, right? They just create these little lives in a petri dish and they just sit in a lab, and it's just seen as this potential life. And that is outside of God's design. And they'll just freeze the embryos for years on end. I just saw something about how these little frozen embryos were born this year, but they were put in a lab 20 or 30 years ago. That's just not right. That is not right. And again, going back to Psalm 139, I'm going to read the whole thing. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. I do not know how you cannot read that passage and call yourself a Christian, but also call yourself pro-choice, right? You cannot call yourself a Christian and call yourself pro-choice. If you are pro-choice, you do not believe the Bible, you are not a Christian. And that's not a radical stance, because how could you read that? You created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. And this isn't the only scripture that points to that idea, right? Jeremiah also does. Just off the top of my head, that's one that I can think of. And if we truly believe that God is sovereign over life, even just going back to the creation account, right? I have that in my notes. Yes, going back to the creation account, Genesis 1 verse 27, God created mankind in his image. How could you be for the brutal murder and the unbiblical creation of life in a lab when we believe that God created us in his image and we believe in his perfect order, right? It also makes me think of Genesis 16, the story of Hagar, and how, Sarah and Abram were promised that they were going to be, God promised Abraham he's going to be the father of many nations. And, Sarah got, at the time she was Sarai, she got impatient, and so she told Abram to go sleep with their servant to have a child. And, we read that story, and it does kind of make me think of IVF, right? Like, I don't know what it's like to struggle with infertility, and I don't want to be insensitive about that, because I think that is probably every woman's worst nightmare. Like that, I mean, I've thought of that. I'm nowhere near even getting married, let alone pregnant, but that is a terrifying thought, not being able to have kids. But it comes down to being faithful, right? Sarai was impatient and she wasn't faithful to God's promise, and so she wanted to take matters into her own hands. And that's the same with IVF. Like, it's just, we're playing God. We want to take matters into our own hands. Like, if I can't conceive, I'm not going to be faithful and see the Lord's goodness through this. I'm going to take it into my own hands, and I'm going to go through this process of IVF, and I'm going to create life in a little petri dish. And like, that's just not right. That's outside of God's design. And I get that mothers can feel stuck and resort to this, but there are other options. And so I was looking through the Live Action website. They are a huge pro-life movement, and they're awesome. Go check out their website and their social medias. They're doing great stuff. And I found this article. So Dr. Lauren Rubel, she is a board-certified OBGYN. So she knows what she's talking about, right? She's legit. And she said, "Who among us hasn't wrestled with anxiety about our fertility?" She asked, "Fertility is an incredibly personal part of our lives. It's a profound gift, but one that many of us try to manage, fix, control, especially when things don't go as expected." And again, that's just back to our fallen nature. We want to be in control. If something's wrong, we want to be able to take that into our own hands and fix it, and we don't want to wait on God and be faithful through that. And again, I don't want to be insensitive to the mothers and, these couples that do struggle with infertility, because I can't even begin to imagine how awful that would be. But there are options. So this woman, Dr. Lauren Rubel, she was helping families with IVF, but then she saw how it was wrong, okay? She said, "We are playing God with life itself." She said, "Children are not products, they are persons. We cannot commodify them or pretend we have the right to create them on demand just because the desire is good." If you're listening, I'm clocking it right now, because yes, that is exactly it. We do not have the right to create them on demand just because the desire is good. And that goes for so many other things. Just because the desire is good does not mean we get to do it, right? Because we have to follow what Scripture says. We have to follow God's created order, because if we don't follow God's created order, it's going to lead to destruction, right? He knows what's best for it. That's, the idea in Hebrews 12 that talks about how good would a father be if he didn't discipline his children, right? How good would a father be if he didn't have these rules in place, right? Because God doesn't give us this order and these rules because he just wants to be annoying and just, be like, follow my rules or else like you're going to hell forever. Like, no, that's not how it works. We have grace, right? Like, we are saved through the grace of Jesus Christ. But there are still these rules and this order put in place because God knows what is best, because he is God, right? And I think we forget that sometimes. And so Rubel, of this doctor, she offered an alternative to those who may be tempted to resort to IVF. She says, restorative reproduction medicine is built on a simple principle. If something in the body isn't working, identify the root cause and restore normal function. She explained that RRM doesn't suppress or override natural fertility, but cooperates with it, treating infertility as a chronic condition rather than one-time failure. So she has this whole thing about this reproductive medicine, and she has recommendations. Start with food, where you eat, heal your gut, support your detoxification, know your numbers, like get your hormones and nutrients tested, learn about your body, restore, don't override, and give yourself grace. Let this journey be one of healing, physical, emotionally, and spiritually. And the point of this wasn't to go into all the alternative options there are to IVF. It was to shine the light on how evil IVF is at the root of it. That quote was just sticking with me. Just because the desire is good does not mean that we get to take the matter into our own hands. And like I said earlier, being pro-life is all about advocating for the unborn children that cannot advocate for ourselves. And what it all comes down to is that God's design for what life should be and how life should be conceived is what reigns over everything. It's what reigns over our desires, what reigns over our need to have control. It's what reigns over our sinful fallen nature, right? Because we do want to take things into control, whether that's IVF, abortion, any number of things. Because at the end of the day, God knows what's best. And he has this created order for a reason, and sometimes we don't understand. I'm sure there's so many couples out there who don't understand why they struggle with infertility, but it's important to know that God is faithful through it all, right? God is a faithful God. He's a sovereign God. He's a loving God. He's a just God. He's a gracious God, right? So as Christians, to answer the question, is IVF biblical? No, it is not biblical. It is not biblical. It is outside of God's design for life. And yeah, I'm just going to end with that quote one more time because it's just really sticking with me. Children are not products. They are persons. We cannot commodify them or pretend we have the right to create them on demand just because the desire is good. So IVF is not biblical. And that doesn't mean that your struggle with infertility is not seen and is not a really hard thing to go through, but that also means that God is not faithful and good through it all.